Hey there everyone, greetings. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. So it's Saturday, I'm walking up and down Bedford Avenue, I got myself a coffee, fall is in the air. We just passed Halloween, today's November 6th. I got work in about an hour and a half, but I got some time to kill, so I want to do this next video on ancestors and death, possibly some reincarnation and things that touch on those concepts. Since we just passed All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos, Halloween, Samhain, and by the time that this video is up and running, we'll soon be coming up on Scorpio, the sign of Scorpio astrologically, which is attributed to Atu 13, the death card, which is not necessarily death, could be, but it's generally transformation or transfiguration. So, being that all these things are up in the air and I've been meditating on them, I want to talk about these concepts. I'll warn in advance that some of the stories that I touch upon might be a little raw, a bit graphic, so your discretion is advised, you know. In the past 5 years, since 2016, I've lost 4 people really close to me. My magical teacher, William Allen Wheeler, my blood sister, half-sister, who's born of the union of my mother and stepfather. She passed away a couple years ago, May 23rd, 2018. And then in 2020, I lost 2 of my closest friends since childhood, Michael McAllister and Martin Stanowski. And even through death, there could be some joy, and I want to kind of talk about that and demonstrate those concepts. So let me start off here by reading to you a text by Aleister Crowley, Liber 106. Liber CVI 106, concerning death. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Let it be thy will and the will of all them that tend upon the sick, to comfort and to fortify them with these words following. It is written in the book of the law, every man and every woman is a star. It is Our Lady of the Stars that speaketh to thee. O thou that art a star, a member of the body of Nuith, listen, for thine ears become dull to the mean noises of the earth. The infinite silence of the stars woos thee with subtle music. Behold her bending down above thee, a flame of blue, all touching, all penetrant. Her lovely hands upon the black earth, and her lithe body arched for love. And her soft feet not hurting the little flowers, and think that all thy grossness shall presently fall from thee as thou leapest to her embrace, caught up into her love as a dewdrop into the kisses of the sunrise. Is not the ecstasy of Nuit the consciousness of the continuity of existence, the omnipresence of her body? All that hath hurt thee was that thou knewest it not. And as that fadeth from thee, thou shalt know as ever yet how all is one. Again she saith, I give unimaginable joys on earth, certainty not faith while in life upon death. This thou hast known. Time that eateth his children hath not power on them that would not be children of time. To them that think themselves immortal, that dwell alway in eternity, conscious of Nuit, throned upon the chariot of the sun, there is no death that men call death. In all the universe, darkness is only to be found in the shadow of a gross and opaque planet, as it were for a moment. The universe itself is a flood of light eternal. So also death is but through accident. Thou hast hidden thyself in the shadow of thy gross body, and taking it for reality thou hast trembled. But the orb revolveth anon, the shadow passeth away from thee. There is the dissolution and the eternal ecstasy in the kisses of Nu. For inasmuch as thou hast made the law of freedom thine, as thou hast lived in liberty, light and liberty and love, thou hast become a free man of the city of the stars. Section 2. Listen again to thine own voice within thee. Is not Hadith the flame that burns in every heart of man and in the core of every star? Is not he life and the giver of life? And is not therefore the knowledge of him the knowledge of death? For it hath been shown unto thee in many other places how death and love be twins. Now art thou the hunter, and death rideth beside thee with his horse and spear, as thou chasest thy will through the forests of eternity, whose trees are the hair of Nuit, thy mistress. Through with the joy of life and death, no, mighty hunter and swift, the quarry turns to bay. Thou hast but to make one sharp thrust, and thou hast won. The Virgin of Eternity lies supine at thy mercy, and thou art Pem. Thy death shall be the seal of the promise of our age-long love. Hast thou not striven to the inmost in thee? Death is the crown of all. Harden, hold up thyself, lift thine head, breathe not so deep, die. Section 3. Or art thou still entangled with the thorny plaits of wild briar rose that thou hast woven in thy magic dance on earth? Art not thine eyes strong enough to bear the starlight? Must thou linger yet a while in the valley? Must thou dally with the shadows in the dusk? Then if it be thy will, thou hast no right but to do thy will. Love still these phantoms of earth. Thou hast made thyself a king. If it please thee to play with toys of matter, were they not made to serve thy pleasure? Then follow in thy mind the wondrous words of the stele revealing itself. Return if thou wilt from the abode of the stars, dwell with mortality, and feast thereon. For thou art this day Lord of heaven and of earth. The dead man Ankaf na Kansu, say with his voice of truth and calm, O thou that hast a single arm, O thou that glitterest in the moon, I weave thee in the spinning charm, I lure thee with the billowy tomb. The dead man Ankaf na Kansu hath parted from the darkling clouds, hath joined the dwellers of the light, opening dawn to the star abodes, their keys receiving. The dead man Ankaf na Kansu hath made his passage into night, his pleasure on the earth to do, among the living. Love is the law, love under will. The benediction of the all-begetter, all-devourer be upon thee. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So, right now, astrologically, I practice sidereal astrology. So, sidereally, in astrology, we're at the end of Libra. It means we're quickly approaching Scorpio. And for those of you that know the tarot and its astrological correspondences, in the tarot, Scorpio is on the death card. It's associated, it corresponds to the death card. And Scorpio is like the nighttime of Mars. So it has like that fiery, warlike energy, but in a more dark, I don't want to say manipulative way, but it's more like the death that comes after war, you know. And in tarot, the death card really is change. It's not always a physical death. I guess in certain cases it can be, but usually if you pull the death card in most readings, 9 out of 10 times, it's going to signify transfiguration, transformation, change in your life. Something big is going to happen. It's going to be transformative, and it could be painful. Sometimes change is, but it's a necessary change in your life that's going to have to happen. So with that, we just passed Samhain a couple weeks, ago. Time goes so fast. I finally have a day off from work, and I'm able to sit down. I have the apartment to myself. My partner's out with a friend, hanging out, so I have peace and quiet. And I decided, I have the time. I'm finally able to make this video, so let's get to it. So today, I'm really going to be talking about death and magical and mundane ancestors, and how Thelema has kind of shaped how I view death, and not only how I cope with it, but how I analyze death, and what my experience with that is. And I think it's a very heavy topic because it's something that we all deal with. Every person's gonna die, so ourselves, you watching, me making this video, people that we love, people that we dislike or hate, everybody's gonna pass one day. I don't know who said it, but death is the equalizer. That's something that we all have in common. We're all gonna go. You could prolong it, but eventually this body is not gonna sustain life anymore. And so what happens after that moment? Thelema has a few ideas. I have some ideas, and I really encourage every single person to sit down and come to terms with what your idea of death is. So for many, many, many generations, people have been stuck in this idea of, especially in this part of the world, in North America, in the United States, Christianity has a stronghold on people's consciousness. So people, when I was growing up, it constantly told me, you're either going to heaven, hell, or purgatory, which is like a stuck in between state if you didn't get baptized and confirmed, or at least baptized. So, like a baby that's stillborn went to purgatory, and then it awaits judgment, because, yeah, a baby could be judged for, you know, that makes sense, or whatever, doesn't matter, you know. The whole thing is nonsense to me now, where I sit and how I look at it. I believe in reincarnation, that we are all energy, and our energy is going to go on to where it needs to go on to. I believe that the ego attaches itself into an astral body afterwards, and sometimes our ka that escapes our body after death, right? I look at the skin, or like the spiritual aspect of our external layer, as the ku. Inside our heart center is the kabs. Inside that is the ka, which is, for me, my understanding, hadith. And it's like this spark of light, the candle flame, the yod of Ararita. And that spiritual flame will eventually leave this body. And I believe that it could sometimes maintain some type of personality, but that personality is going to be altered and changed by whatever experiences and whatever body it possesses next, if it possesses a body, if it doesn't just go on back to the source in nirvana, or if you don't go into some type of other life form, such as vegetation, you know. That really depends karmically upon each and every person, where they go. So for me, it's reincarnation. And I think most of us are probably going to come back as another human. And I also have the idea that in reincarnation, I don't believe we're stuck to just this universe. I do like the idea of the multiverse, and that you could go to a universe very similar to this one and live this exact life. Merely, there might be one or two minor alterations along the life, but you could literally go on to relive this life if you messed it up that bad, and you need to make some serious changes that you didn't make in this life. I believe that you get that chance to do it again. Or you may come back based karmically on whatever you've done or not done into a whole completely different person. You might be a different gender, a different race, a different nationality, or perhaps there are other planets and life forms out there that sustain life, and maybe you'll come back as that species, depending on what you really need to grow. And wherever that ka ends up in the universe, the life form or the body that it inhabits is really going to be a determination upon the personality that that ka in the kabs establishes. A little bit of dense concepts to start off. If you know you're new to Thelema and you don't really know what I'm talking about, just get into the Book of the Law. You know, that's really where you need to start. Read the Book of the Law, read Magic Book 4, in Theory and Practice by Crowley. Study your Kabbalah, and slowly these ideas start to take shape, you know? So, being that it's the season of death that I just mentioned, you know, we're coming up on Scorpio, we passed Samhain, we had Halloween. I did some personal work of my own, and I want to talk about ancestors, both mundane as well as magical, and how we could work with them, and why you might want to work with them or not, you know. So, on I want to start with, I've had 3 deaths to me, next close to me on the mundane plane, and I want to talk a little bit about those 3 people. The first of which is my sister, and I'm going to gloss over. She was 16, and I want to leave her out of this. I'll talk a little bit about her later on a magical note, but I don't want to put her life story out. I don't want that out there. I want to keep family private, because I don't need problems with family. But I did lose my little sister. She was 16. That was in 2018, I believe. It was during the summer. It's been a couple years now. And yeah, it was very hard for me, you know. I'm going to stop right here and say, if you have people close to you who have passed away and you're having a hard time coping, therapy helps. Don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist, and you need to talk, and you need to somehow process death. So I've done therapy for her, and for the other 2 people that I want to talk about on the mundane note, we're both friends that passed away a couple months apart from each other. Their names are Michael McAllister, and Martin Stanowski. I can't say his last name right, so I just say Stanowski. It's a long Polish name. It starts with Stan, ends with Ski. I made up the middle piece, and sorry, you know, we called him Smirek. That was his street name, and I've known him for a long time. But Mike and Martin passed away, so I'm going to focus on those two and just say that my sister's death did also happen. And when I get to some magical stuff later, dealing with magical aspects of people who have passed, I'll talk about something that happened after she passed and how that helped me. But yeah, therapy is not a bad thing. Processing is necessary. Crowley himself writes in Diary of the Drug Fiend that one of the most important things for Thelemites and for practitioners of magic is introspection. You need to constantly take a survey of what's going on in your internal world, put things in their right order, and make changes where necessary. A lot of people walk this path and not really understanding that, hey, learning all of these occult things is not just cool knowledge. It's tools to help you develop yourself, to help you change, to help you look at what you're doing in your life, and what are you doing correctly and what are you doing incorrectly, and how do you change? How do you make those necessary changes so you could be have a more fulfilling life, and actually discover who and what you are, and walk the path that you need to walk, so that you're not here wasting your time. Because again, death does come. My partner is a Freemason, and he says all the time that in Masonry there's a deep meditation on death, and for him it's just a reminder that our time is limited, and we need to do what we need to do while we're here. We don't have time to waste. You have to do your will. Whatever your will is, you need to get that done. So therapy helps. There's a long tangent to say, especially with mundane people, I find it a lot more sad when magical people pass, or people who are walking a very spiritual path and have coped with their own death. I find it way less sad and traumatizing. It's a lot easier for me to deal with, and it's for my teacher, who's the other person I'm going to talk about today that passed away, that was close to me. It was very easy, I think, for him going, and for me outside watching, and his death really was beautiful. So on the mundane note, like I just said, I think it's a lot sadder when people have not been living their full potential. And the two people that I lost close to me, Mike and Martin, were both heavily on drugs for many years and drinking for many years. And it took a toll on both of them. And so I did some stuff with them during this season of Samhain and Halloween, and I'll talk about that. So let me introduce my friend Mike that passed away. So Michael McAllister, we went to the same grammar school for 7th and 8th grade. He was a year ahead of me, so I knew him. We started hanging out when we were both in high school, and it quickly graduated from weed to the first person I did coke with, to ecstasy, to LSD, to crack, to heroin, drinking all throughout that, and a bunch of other stuff in between, drugs and craziness and whatnot. And he's a person that was very close to me since childhood, and we stopped hanging out these past 6, 7, 8 years or so. After I went to prison and I came home, I made a lot of changes. I came out as transgender, I was a Thelemite, I was studying the Kabbalah, I was not doing drugs, I was not hanging out on the street like he was still, unfortunately. I was not getting in trouble, I was not getting into fights, I was making changes that were necessary for my development in this incarnation. Things that I was afraid of, I was dealing with. People who I'd wronged, I was trying to make right and amend situations. Not just with family, but people who I had hurt along my career using drugs. I needed to make some changes, so we stopped hanging out, but we were from the same neighborhood, Greenpoint, Brooklyn. So we'd see each other a lot, and there was still that bond of friendship. Like, when you spend multiple days awake with a person, and you're hanging out with them over years, and you're breaking night on a frequent basis, a few times a week, you're talking and you're getting to know each other in a way that few people really do. So there was a connection and a bond that was there. There was a real friendship. So we started hanging out when I was 14, and we started doing coke together by the time I was 15. And, you know, we had been hanging out since then, so it's you know, it was about 15 years by his passing. Passed away in January 2020. And he was a person, he probably one of the few people I hung out with that did a lot more drugs than I did. And, you know, I was shooting 3 bags, he was shooting 10 bags at a time. And it just caught up to him between the heroin, the Xanax for years, and then he finally laid those aside, and he was dating some girl, and the drinking for years. I don't know how much he was drinking, but I saw him put away a gallon a day just hanging out on the streets, and in his last year or two. So he was drinking quite heavily for the last year of his life, and he had blood clots in his leg, and it caught up to him. So I don't know what type of pain he might have been dealing with emotionally, if he had emotional pain or suffering inside. Maybe he was just not comfortable with himself. I don't know what it was with him, but I don't think that you're suicidal on drugs and alcohol the way he was without having something inside you that you feel needs to change, and or you're just afraid of dealing with. And you know, unfortunately this happens all too often between heroin, opiates, and everything. But yeah, it's like he was the person in my life that I started almost every single drug with for the first time. And you know, there's a funny story I'll tell. Like when I was 18, I went to jail for a year because I blacked out on alcohol. I had stopped doing drugs, I blacked out, and I woke up in the precinct because I broke into a store and had no recollection of almost anything that night. I was in a blackout. I get to Rikers Island some months later. I was in programs for like a year or so, and I messed up the program because I relapsed, and so I got caught with the dirty urine. They were going to extend my time in programs, and I just started running from the programs, getting warrants, getting caught, so on and so forth. And so I ended up in Rikers Island waiting to get sentenced to a year in jail after multiple program failures. And at that time, you know, now it's like 18 months after I caught the charge, Mike had gotten arrested somewhere like 12 months after I got my charge, and now he was in jail waiting to get sentenced for his crime. I forget what it was. I think it was robbery or something. He was breaking into cars. I believe that was what it was. And so he had the same judge, a different case. And so we end up in the same house on Rikers Island. Mind you, there's 30,000, 40,000 people on Rikers Island at any given time, and there are hundreds of houses that you could end up in, 50 people to a house. I ended up in the same house, sleeping a couple beds away from him. Both of us were on the house gang in that house. You have responsibilities, you clean up, and you get privileges that other people don't get. You get access to certain stuff and movement. And not only that, we had court on the same day, and me and him end up handcuffed together. And we're looking at each other like... And for me, this was my first realization with Mike, was that we had messed up so bad, and here we are, the person I started this shit with, handcuffed right next to each other on the bus going to see a judge. So it's just the irony, like it dawned on me, like, okay, yeah, we both messed up and I need to make some changes. And it took me a couple of years and some, you know, some attempts and failures along the way, but slowly and surely I made those changes, and I'm not living the life I was living back then. I'm a much different person today than I was. I'm not committing crimes every day. I'm not getting in trouble every day. I'm not getting in trouble at all. I'm not doing anything wrong, you know. I'm living a spiritual life. I'm practicing magic. I'm trying to give back and do service, and I've done service over the years in various ways. But yeah, I knew that moment that the person I had started messing up with really bad as a teenager is now handcuffed next to me. We need to make some changes, otherwise like, we're not going anywhere good. It's just going to progressively get worse. He didn't have that realization, sadly. You know, he went back out and did the same thing and never made an attempt. Maybe once or twice, but it was, from what I saw, it was very half-hearted and short-lived attempts at making any types of changes, you know. And I saw in the last couple years of his life, he was hanging out outside a lot more. Now, he had parents that enabled him and loved, but they loved him, and they always gave him shelter, they gave him money, they took care of him, he was well-fed, you know, he was housed, and he always had money, and but he would still hang out for days at a time and drink and party and take it way too far on an everyday basis. And I just found out from his mother recently that what actually killed him was a blood clot that transferred to it. It went from his leg to his heart, and he stopped breathing. And you know, I had to do some serious therapy. I shed some tears behind that one because you know, after all the years of abuse, it's not like it was unexpected, but the last time I had seen him, he didn't look that bad. I didn't realize, like, how bad his internal organs and everything were from the abuse, you know. He looked okay on the outside, like a couple months before his death, and then, you know, I just get a text one day, not seeing him for 6 months or so, 4 months, that from an old friend in Greenpoint saying that he had passed away. So I got in contact with his mother, and yeah, she confirmed it. So it's been a year and a half, or, you know, a year and, it was January, so a year and 10 months or so, since he passed away. Now, one of the most useful things was about a 45-minute session that I did on therapy just on him, talking about our whole entire friendship. And I cried so hard during that session, but it was so healing, you know? And so it helped me really kind of feel okay with that. That, you know, I don't get to see this person ever again, but I'm alright with it. You know, there's nothing I could do. And there's a big ego thing there that, if you're attached to somebody, it hurts because you're powerless. You can't do anything about it, and you really have to accept and surrender to that. And when you do, the pain sort of passes. There's still moments that you miss the person, and there's moments you want them back, but there's also a sense of peace that I now have, now that I fully processed his passing. Yeah, it's like, it's heavy for me still, but, you know, I'm good with it. And I can honestly say, you know, I know that he has peace now, and hopefully he'll make changes in his next life, because I do believe people get another chance, they get a go around. Now, what I did with him this season was, I got out of work at 5 p.m. on Samhain, which was the 30th of October, and I made plans with his mom to go over his house, because she has his urn there. And as you can see, I'm posting the picture here of, it's almost like a nice altar to him. So I went there. I had made plans a month prior, so I had time. And when I was still in therapy, the therapist and I decided it might be a good idea if I write a letter to him saying everything that I needed to say. And when I'm at their house one day, and it happened to be Samhain, we agreed that I could go over, I would sit down, read the letter, and then I'd leave it on his altar next to his urn so that it would be there with him. And yeah, I cried during that moment. It felt really good. There was a release in it. I had dinner with his mother. I did that. I also offered a pack of cigarettes. I don't know if you could see in the picture on the right. There's an envelope, a pack of cigarettes, and I left one of my favorite Venom keychains because my friend Martin that passed away loves Spider-Man. I love Venom. And Mike just likes Superman because of the outfit that he had the hat, he had the t-shirt, and he had the hoodie, all Superman. It's not that he really liked the character, but he just loved that outfit. So as you can see, the urn has Superman on it. So it's like Superman, Spider-Man, and Venom. Because I've always been a little bit of a black sheep and an outcast, especially the fact that I kind of disappeared for so long. And I always loved anti-heroes anyway. So it was kind of fitting, you know, being Venom in that scenario. So I left an offering. I took a couple of shots of vodka because it was actually vodka that killed him, you know. So it was kind of like my little Dia de la Muertos, my little Day of the Dead. I got to give him some of his stuff that he likes. He loved Marlboros. He loved vodka. I read this letter. His mother gave me the apartment. They both went into their bedroom, his mother and father, and they left me in the apartment, which, you know, from the history that they knew me from back in the day, like, it shows how much I've changed just that. Like, here's people that saw me at my worst, and they were just like, here, you take the apartment. We know you're trustworthy. And I am, and that's the thing, like, but just to see it in them, like, and I thank them for that trust and for that respect that they gave me. And they have my love, you know, and they have my support and everything that I could do for them. You know, it's kind of like an extended family right there. Now, a really sweet thing that Mike's mom did do on the day that I went over there, October 30th for Samhain, was she gave me several things. One is a picture that I showed earlier of Mike wearing his Superman sweater, t-shirt, hat. He had the sneakers on as well, but you don't see them in the picture. She gave me a Spider-Man car to represent Martin from some of Mike's childhood toys that she had kept, you know, how moms are. And she actually gave me this gold ring. It has an M on it for Mike, and it's actually from his confirmation. It represents Mike and Martin, she said, but she bought it for him as a gift for his confirmation into the Roman Catholic Church. And just, she knows that I'm super into religion, so she felt it was appropriate that if she was going to give away some of his stuff, she wanted to give this to me, because I'll hold on to it. So it's like I have him with me now. I put it on a chain. His hands are too big for, for me to wear this ring. Even when he was a kid, they were big. He was a big boy. But, yeah, for me, it's like I carry a piece of him with me now. So I'm just super grateful that his mom did that for me. And so we had dinner. I made those offerings to him. Again, I made my peace. I had a healing moment with this person that's passed away. And it was on Samhain. Samhain was exactly 6 p.m. that day. And so I had gotten there just at about 6 p.m. And that was really cool for me. So that's Mike. Now, Mike and Martin were really good friends, and they were hanging out the past year of both of their lives up until Mike passed away. And Martin, I had talked about in my previous video about drug addiction, and how Martin saved my life a couple of times, and I don't want to rehash that. If you want to hear some of that stuff, you could go to the video about drugs. But Martin, I watched him kind of go crazy from psychedelics. He quit heroin and crack, and he was just crazy with psychedelics. And there was a moment when we were sharing an apartment together back in 2012 where Martin snapped, and I saw he didn't come back from the trip. He's like, he got stuck in a bad trip, where he was starting to deal with some spiritual stuff, but then he went too far with psychedelics and he just wasn't making sense. Like, it was at first really interesting meditations and ideologies and ways to meditate and really cool stuff that now that I'm serious about occultism, I could say, wow, yeah, those were some great ideas that he had, but then he just took it too far. And I don't want to give examples because I don't want to degrade this person. It's unfortunate, and I don't want to shame him, but I do want to at the same time speak truth, about the situation. So I had seen him kind of go crazy in 2012, and then he just spent the next years homeless. And it's weird, like, he was living on my block in Greenpoint, where I was staying in my grandmother's house, on Leonard Street, Brooklyn, where I was on the top floor. My mother and, well, my sisters were on the middle floor, and my mother was on the bottom floor. It's a 3-story family house. So he was on the corner in front of the library, and it's like, I'd go outside, I'm either going to work, or I was working at City Hall, or I was going to school, or going to a 12-step meeting at that time, or wherever I was going, or I was going to an occult meeting, or hanging out with people who were doing stuff with their life. And I'd see him sitting there with people, a bunch of other homeless people, and doing drugs or drinking, or by himself, smoking crack, camping out. He had like a tent city on the corner of the block. Well, I leave my house one day, 7 in the morning, and it's like he's on the corner sweeping the street where he sleeps. I'm just like, where did he get a broom from? Like, completely crazy. It's like he looks like he's sweeping his living room. He's sweeping a street in front of a construction site. They were rebuilding the library, and it's like, dude, this is not the front, like, your front house. You're sweeping the sidewalk, like, the gutter. Like, this is madness. But that was Martin, He had a very hard life. It's like his parents kicked him out of the house after his mother died. His father didn't want the responsibility, and so he started smoking weed at a young age, probably dealing with stress and whatever, life. And his father didn't tolerate it and kicked him out of the house at like 13, 14 years old. And actually my aunt from my father's side of the family, who I'm estranged from my father's side of the family. I don't talk to my father. He had issues with me being trans. He was not there for my childhood, my teenage years. He tried to come in at bad moments in my life in the wrong way, and so my father's not in my life. But I do know my aunt from that side of the family. She's a sweet woman, and she helped me in recovery, in early recovery, when I was stopping drugs the first time. And Martin actually lived with her and my cousin, who he went to school with. My cousin and him went to school, and so my Aunt Sally and sort of raised Martin for a few years until the drugs continued to escalate, and she had to ask him to leave by the time he was like 17. So he was then homeless for many years. Finally, his aunt took him in, continued using drugs. He stole from her enough times. She was just fed up and kicked him out. It's like she couldn't be dealing with this nonsense. And so he was just living on the corner of my block. And, but this again was a person that I'd spent many days awake with, running the streets, causing trouble, making money, doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing, going crazy, doing whatever, sharing an apartment together, selling drugs, doing whatever. balls to the wall till the wheels fell off and everything. And so, you know, I saw this one coming too in a weird way, and there was one moment I tried to say something to him, and he didn't want to hear it. He pushed me away, and I just said, Martin, you know, there's things you could do to try to live a better, happier life, and I know you probably don't want to hear this, but man, you should really stop using and get into a rehab. And he had every excuse not to. I don't need a rehab and blah, blah, blah. And you should take a look in the mirror before you tell me anything. You're still living with family. I'm like, I love you. I'm sorry I even said anything, but I had to say it. And then when Mike died, I tried to tell him, dude, I hope that you're not next. And he got himself actually housing through a homeless program that, you know, you're homeless on the street for so long. There's ways to get an apartment in New York City, some areas. So he took advantage of that, and he had finally went from like an interim place to his own room, and he had some money, and so he ended up doing cocaine there. Somebody called the cops. He was on the 12th floor, and he jumped out of the window in paranoia, running from the cops because he was going to get arrested and probably lose everything. And he just snapped. It's like when you're shooting cocaine, you get this state of paranoia that you think the cops are coming, if that's one of your fears. And so to actually have the cops come, I know exactly what he was going through when I used to do that shit. And it was just so tragic. You know, I got that phone call at work one day from another person, and it's like, it was expected, but not at that moment. You know, it's like he had just gotten this apartment, and it's like, just shows you, like, when you need to make changes and you're running from something and you're not dealing with your shit, it's like, it just creeps up on you, and it got him in a bad way. Now, what I did recently this season for him was I located his grave, and I was trying to do a video that day when I went there. It was a little bit before Samhain, you know. I'm not going to give an exact time frame, but it was very recent. It was just the past couple weeks. And so I went there. I had the plot number that's on the back of the card. Now the card's in Polish. I can take a picture. I'll show it here. And I went to his gravesite, and there was a woman at the gravesite. And so apparently his father, who they threw the wake for him where I got the card at, and I made my peace with his corpse, and I actually saw him. That was the real moment for me. I needed that dose of reality, actually just seeing him one last time at the wake, which was helpful, and then doing therapy with him on him also was helpful. So I get to that grave finally after looking, and the workers were no help. Nobody spoke English, so I couldn't like ask them, and I tried using Translate, and they pointed me in the wrong direction. So I'm searching for like an hour or two, trying to make a video of what I wanted to do there. I wanted to leave a red cloth, because he would always wear red bandanas of some type, and I wanted to do a ritual there. And I get to the grave, and it's unmarked. It just has a woman and her name on it. And so a week goes by from that day, and I was really upset. Like, I left the flag there because it looked just like him. And turns out it was his mother's grave, and he is also buried there, but his cheap father, who just doesn't give a shit about him, it's like, that's the family he had, didn't put his name on the grave. But I spoke to his cousin, who called his father and asked, hey, is Martin buried there? And yes, he was cremated, and his ashes are buried there. They actually put an urn in the ground there. So it was good to know I did have the right grave. It was kind of interesting, unexpectedly, to see his mother's photo engraved on the tombstone. And it was just like looking at him, but if he was born a female, or if he had a wig on and he was cross-dressing. Like, it was bizarre to me. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting his grave, and his name wasn't even there, which to me was just really sad, and it's just disrespectful. I almost like wanted to get a stone and carve it in myself, but I don't want to, you know, mess with his mother's tombstone. It's just not, that's not respectful either. But I did say my piece to the tombstone, and as like an introduction to his mom, which was unexpected. And in a way I made my peace, but when the week had gone by and I saw his cousin, I actually got to confirm that yes, Martin is buried there. I felt really relieved, and I was happy. And Mike's mom, who I just had dinner with, she also knew Martin because the two of them hung out. He had neck surgery. She let him get off the street for a couple weeks and stay at her house with Mike, and, you know, until he was healed, and then he had to go again. She wasn't letting him live there. But she knew him, and so I got to give her a picture of the grave as well. And so I had to actually go through like a deep process to get past the sorrow, because I know these two people, and I know them well enough that they were not living their full potential. They had so much more that they could have been doing, and they were just living self-destructive lives. And I believe that based on that, like, they were making the wrong decision on an everyday basis so frequently, like, they probably have a lot of karma that they need to work out, and I do believe both of them are coming back. And so there was a bit of sadness that, hey, I'm not going to get to have these people in my life anymore, and they're not okay with their death. They were not okay. They were not accepting of death. They were both stuck in that Christian heaven-hell mind state, and the people in their families are stuck in that heaven-hell mind state. Their funerals were both sad and heavy and Christian and depressive. And so, you know, I did make my peace, at least with both of these people, but I had to go through a process. It was not the same as what I'm about to talk about. So, the next thing I want to talk about is William, but as a prelude to that, or a sort of interim, is the idea floating in my head of magical ancestry and also necromancy. Now, ancestry could be, in one sense, the person who taught you. If you had a teacher and somebody that you connected with as your guide on the physical plane, that person could be your direct ancestor. For many people, it's their family, and there are some, like especially the African religions, like Yoruba is one that I'm fairly familiar with. Ancestry, your whole family is part of this religion as well. So your ancestors are not just your spiritual teachers, or who you took as like your main spiritual teacher, but your ancestors are your bloodline, because they were practicing this religion as well, and they should have been doing it very heavily. Your parents also should have been priests and priestesses of some sort, you know. So I think in African cultures it's way more concrete and beautiful, because ancestry is both your spiritual family and your blood family. It's one and the same. Now here in the West, especially when it comes to occult religions, it's not a widely practiced thing. It's wide, but it's not like how Christianity. My family is Roman Catholic. How many Christians do you know as opposed to occultists? It's just like, it's overwhelming. So the odds that your parents were also occultists is very slim compared to the odds that your parents were Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, you know. So ancestry could be, if you belong to a religion, for instance, I'm a Thelemite, Aleister Crowley could be one of my ancestors. So if I'm going to do some type of ancestral working, it could be with that idea in mind. So for me, my teacher's name was William, or it could be with Aleister Crowley in mind. Now there are different ways to honor your ancestors. If you practice the Book of the Law, and some of the tenets are in the Book of the Law, there's ways to celebrate the prophet and his bride, for instance. There's feast days and there's rituals of the time. So when the seasons change, but there's also specific moments in Aleister Crowley's life. For example, we celebrate the reception of the Book of the Law, the feast of the first night of the prophet and his bride. I've heard it coined Crowley Mass, October 12th, the day Aleister Crowley was born. You could celebrate Aleister Crowley's greater feast. So there are many different things that you could do that honor specific moments in Crowley's life. I've seen people create rituals. I myself have created rituals for some of these days. Maybe on his birthday, reading the Book of the Law with a group of people. When I was at Tahuti Lodge, they probably still do it. They go to a specific bar in the village that Crowley used to attend when he was here in the 19-teens up to 1920. So he'd frequent this bar, and he'd, you know, either have beer or I think he would scotch or whiskey or something. And so he'd sit there drinking, probably writing poetry, meeting other occultists, and Crowley did what Crowley did, you know. So, for example, we'd meet on his birthday. There are other ways to honor. Now, for me, when it comes to William Allen Wheeler, I'll just talk about him very briefly. You know, we met on March 30th, 2015, online, and we had never met in person, but we had spent so many hours over the phone and on video calls that it's like I knew this person better than almost anyone in my life at that time. And we worked together for exactly 15 months, from March 30th to August 30th, 2016, and he passed away on my birthday. Now, when I met him, I was researching how to do the Mass of the Phoenix, and it was just one line that was confusing me, and I had people that I could ask, but I posted on a Thelema group, and he reached out to me, and he was funny. He wrote, "How can this mage help you?" And he really was a mage. He was a magi. Like, he knew his shit, and it's just like, I already got the answers to the Mass of the Phoenix, but, let me see what this guy knows. So I asked him, hey, can you help me with the Mass of the Phoenix? And so he said, could we talk over the phone? Are you comfortable with that? So we did. And he gave me all the same answers that the person I had asked here in New York gave me, and some other information that sounded good too. And so we started talking on an everyday basis, and sure as shit, some months went by, and he became my teacher. Now, when I met him, he had stage 4 cancer. It was like the second or third phone call. He told me, he's like, hey, don't get too attached. I'm not going to be here that long, but I'm still willing to work with you if you'd have me as, a teacher, or you just want to be friends, whatever, we could talk. But he took me on my first magical retreat when I was going through some heavy emotional stuff. I was really scared about school coming up. I was a high school dropout, and I was going to be going to college, and I was really terrified. I didn't think I was going to do well at it. It was going to take too much time out of my day, and I didn't really have a direction of what I wanted to do with a college education. So I was very upset and nervous, and all of anxiety and other emotions. And he put me through a weekend-long magical retreat, and it was such a heavy, growing upheaval of positivity that after that I knew, like, okay, this guy's going to be my teacher. Now, he gave me a system, and so we were working together for this 15 months. I knew he had cancer, and we spent thousands of hours on the phone, like 8-hour phone calls on a nightly basis, and we had our trials. There was a brief couple, it was about a month or two where we didn't really talk because I got super upset with him, and yeah, he had a lying disposition due to childhood trauma, and I didn't know that, so he would lie about certain personal things. Like, for instance, he said that he was coming to New York, and turns out he was not coming to New York. We were not going to get to meet in person, and so that's when it came out that he was lying, and so I cut it off with him. His student, once I let him back into my life, his student reached out to me and said, hey, if I could talk with you for a moment, and he explained that, hey, this is why William does that. He was abused by his father, and so he lies in order to keep people closer to him. And these are what the red flags look like, and when you see those, all you have to do is just say, hey, William, we're going down that road, and he'll stop immediately like this. And he knows he's doing it, but he does it because he's afraid of losing people, and in the midst, he pushes people away by lying once it comes out that he was lying. And so then it reinforces his trauma and loss, So it's like a vicious cycle with him. And once I understood that, I knew how to interact with this person even better, and we had to have a vulnerable... And he taught me vulnerability. There's strength in vulnerability. Like, he had to lay his cards on the table and possibly lose a relationship that he was really happy with, a friendship. And, yeah, that vulnerability. And then, he exposed his mental weakness of, like, hey, he has a lying psychosis, a mental disability that he's dealing with because of childhood trauma and PTSD. And he had to be vulnerable with me about that. And not only that, when he's doing it, I had to address it. And that takes a lot for a person to be able to say, hey, I'm sorry, can we please hit the reset button? Not on a daily basis. It would be like, it only happened a couple more times after that. And they were minor things, now that, like, it was out in the open. But there was a couple of instances where I had to say, hey, William, that sounds a little too fanciful. Can we reel it in? Because I think we're going down that road again. He's like, I'm so sorry. You're 100% completely right. Let's hit the reset button. Okay, this is the truth. And see, that sounds a little bit better. And now what you're saying makes more sense. And yeah, so that was my relationship with him. Now, the last month of his life, he was starting to go through dementia. And once they really put him on heavy doses of opioids, he was not doing well mentally, and unfortunately at that point we were not working together, so I had joined outer college, and that's maybe a story for another day, maybe not a story for another day. We gotta see how I feel about that one. But as he was passing away, it was like 2 months before, he knew that it was coming. He had 2 types of cancer. One went into remission, the other one went a little bit more extended. It was getting worse, and it was at that moment he asked me, out of his 5 or 6 students that he had that were like active at the time, he had taught other people. He practiced for 45 years, so he worked with many people over the years. He asked me if I was really the only Thelemite that he was training. He was well versed in a lot of fairy traditions, Wicca, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Thelema. He had a lot of stuff under his belt, so he was dealing with other things with other people. But I was the only Thelemite, and because of that, we had a special connection. He loved Libras. He loved the Book of the Law, so he accepted both the Book of the Law and Libras, and he lived them to the best of his ability. And so he asked me to do his last rites, and so I read him Liber 106, and Liber 106, I think if not the next video, very soon, I might do a breakdown of Liber 106, because it's been a text that I read a couple of times. I read it recently as I was writing the letter to Mike that I left on his altar, and I read it as I was thinking of making this video and whether or not I should do a breakdown in this video. And ultimately, what I could say about it in shortness, when I did last rites for William, it hit him really hard, because there was a moment he told me, Lexi, I think I'm afraid. And that was when I gave him his last rites. It was about a month and a half to 2 months before his death. And I saw that fear melt away from him. And it's just a simple reminder that, hey, in our heart burns Hadid. That's the true essence of what we are as humans, right? That's what we are as conscious living beings. Everything outside of us is Nuid. Everything that we do in this universe is nothing more than the interplay of Hadid and Nuid. And when I'm not here, that play is still going to be going on, and I'm still going to be a part of it. Just because this physical body has died, I'm nothing more than God experiencing itself. And that peace of knowing that my spirit is going to go on, and I have the choice of going on into Nirvana, or whether or not I want to come back here, or whether or not I need to come back here to continue my work. Knowing that, and just knowing that existence is joy, that everything I do breeds happiness, and it's the joy of Nuit to interact with Hadid. And that's the only reason that we're separated from the divine source, is for the chance of union, is to be able to interact with another God form, to be able to perceive ourselves evolving. That is a beautiful thing. And knowing that, hey, this is not the end. The pain is not, it's temporary. The fear is fleeting. It's gonna go. It's just one jump. And there's a quote by Crowley, you know, we have to live life to the fullest, so this way we can meet death with a certain prestige. And, you know, if you've done what you needed to do while you're here, I could say, because he told me from his experience, he did his will. He did his will while he was here. He came here to do what he did. And that feeling, knowing that there was nothing left at this moment in this body that he needed to do, he was able to go with such peace. And it's like the universe gave me a gift, because I'm still here. I get the phone call the afternoon of my birthday, August 30th, 2016, that from the same person that explained the red flags and how to address that with him, the other student. And he had said, Lexi, are you sitting down? And I knew once a phone call was coming from him out of nowhere that this is what happened. He said, Lexi, today was the day William passed away, and he was living at his house at the time, so, you know, this was a student that changed his diapers, carried him, brought him to the hospital when he needed to, and was there the morning that William passed away. And, yeah, it happened that morning, and I was taken by happiness. I'm like, knowing that he no longer had a fear, that having his last rites performed for him by me gave him that sense of peace and confidence. Knowing that he accomplished his will, of what he came this incarnation to accomplish, he did. That he's able to come back and do it again, because he loves life, and he's happy, and there's a joy being here, and every single day was just happiness for him. He was free. He was free sexually, he was free mentally, he had nothing but love in his life for the people that were in his life. And it's like, what more could you want? that death was not I smiled. He was like, Lexi, you sit down. And I said, I'm already sitting, but I'm okay. Me and William had an understanding that, hey, this is not the end. So I was happy. There was a sense of joy. Unlike Mike and Martin passing, or my sister, it was just a sense of these were not people who accomplished their will, so to speak. They could have done more if they really applied themselves. They did what they did while they were here. I hope that they enjoyed themselves. If they come back, God bless them. If they don't, God bless them. They'll do what they need to do as divine spirits. They have that right to do what they need to do. From the outside looking in, it's like it hurt to see their passing. Not so with William. With William, it was a much different one. You know, he came here and did what he needed to do, and there's such a happiness and joy in that. I know I'm saying it over and over. I just want to reinforce it in your mind that from my experience, seeing people do their will and accomplishing what they need to accomplish while they're here, there's nothing greater than that in this lifetime. Nothing is going to bring you more happiness. Nothing is going to bring you more peace than doing that. Accomplishing your will. Learning what you need to do while you're here and doing it. And having some humility about it, because sometimes it's not the big grandiose. We're not all going to be princes of the country, whatever. We're not going to rule the globe. And Liber will tell you, the hell, you're the size of an atom in the friggin' universe. If you own the planet, you own a speck of dust in an infinite, expanse of space. Congratulations to you. It's like, was that really, good for you, honestly. Now, with William, right, 2 months had gone by, and his sister was splitting up his ashes as he wanted, and it was going to his students, and then she was keeping the rest of them. So the urn that I have up there on a pattern with the sigil to Nuit that I got from Liber New, doing Liber New, I received those ashes in the mail on Halloween 2016. So next thing you know, I went out. I should buy an urn proper, but I don't want to really move them again, so they're staying in that jar. So I went out Halloween, I got them. I went to the city, I bought a jar, I put them in it, and I did Ritual 0, which you could find in the description below to this video. And I did that ritual, and we had an understanding. Now, necromancy. There is good necromancy, and there is bad necromancy. Unethical. One that is going to bring you some karmic backlash. For instance, bad necromancy, I do not recommend it. If you're into sigil magic, or let's say you're into the runes of Asatru, right, Odinism, and you know how to use the runes, you could get a recently deceased person, you could take one of their bones, you can bind them to that bone, their spirit, and then you could use certain runes. Let's say you want money, there's runes for money, that they are going to be your spiritual servitor until you release them, that their spirit is going to have to work for you to get you money. And things will happen in your life. Now, mind you, if you start doing stuff like that, I'm not going to teach you how to do it, I'm not going to give you ritual examples, I gave you the idea, the knife is in your hands. I do not recommend doing stuff like that. You're interfering with somebody's will, you're binding them to something that's so totally corrupt. It even says in Liber, if you abuse the elemental spirits, like the gnomes, for money, that's even bad. Now imagine taking a person and binding them to your wants and petty needs, it's like, don't recommend it. In one of the grimoires up above me up here, there's another description of necromancy that you could take a person's head, recently deceased, and through certain invocations you can make it talk, and you could use it to divine secrets of the universe, or whatever just like you were using a tarot deck, and supposedly it'll talk to you. Don't know to what extent that's true, if it's just on the astral plane, if you hear voices, or if the head will actually start talking like how I'm talking to you on this video. I've never done it. I have no desire at this moment to do something like that. There's probably ways that you could get a consensual donor. That might be okay. If you're grave robbing somebody who's recently died to go do that, that's also, in my view, like, that's not a good karmic thing to do. Those are bad necromancy. Now, ethical necromancy, on the other hand, I had permission to bring William back through the veil. So using Ritual 0, if you read it, it's just activating the 5 parts of the soul through pentagrams. You're drawing 4 elemental pentagrams 4 times around you. So 4 earth pentagrams, or 5 times, 4 air pentagrams, 4 water pentagrams in each corner, 4 fire, and then 4 spirit pentagrams. And when you draw the pentagrams, you're doing it with the substance. So for earth, you're using some type of earthy substance. For fire, you're using flame. For water, you're using water, right? For air, you might use incense or a feather. And then for spirit, you actually disrobe and you use the sign of the ficus. And it's kind of like you're taking off your outer layer and you're exposing your spirit and you're offering this to the great work to become an aspirant, so to speak. You're offering yourself to divinity to become a spiritual practitioner. There's implications of service and spiritual growth in there, etc. So I had permission to do this with his ashes, so I had them in the jar and I used his ashes that night for the earth pentagrams. And that actually, using this ritual with him in mind to bring him through the veil, there's a moment where you stand at your altar after you've drawn the pentagrams. My intent was to bring him through the veil. Now, it was just about 2 months after he passed away, so his spirit is, his consciousness, his Ka, is not reincarnated for sure. It's still in the ether. So I was able to bring him, as he looked, through the veil, and I was able to hug him on the astral plane. I was able to hear his voice physically in my temple, and I was able to interact with him and know that he was okay, he was happy, things were good. And so this Halloween I did that again, as kind of, how could you say it, you know, just as a remembrance, an act of gratitude, symbolic, as somewhat of a personal tradition. So I think when it comes to you and your own ancestors, you could do something like that, you know, if you have their permission. Or if you, on the day that they died, for instance, you might do a ritual that you know that they love, right? Or you might go visit their resting place if it's accessible to you. You might read something, a quote or a book that they really love. Yeah, he loves Stranger in a Strange Land. I just read that again recently. So things like that, ways that you can honor this person that's close to you, and you should do it in a personal way that's only you would know, right? Develop your own techniques. I've given you an example below of how you might be able to do that, and by all means, use that ritual respectfully in that way, or use it without using ashes, respectfully, if it be thy will. You know, it's fine. It's a safe ritual. I've done it myself. It activates parts of the soul. You don't have to use it for necromancy. But, yeah, so that's examples of ethical necromancy. Attuning yourself to a person who's spiritually inclined that worked with you, or that you were friends with who was spiritual and did some type of work, you know? There's things like that that you could do that could be considered necromancy, and they're totally fine. They're not going to bring you any negative karma, or anything bad is going to happen from doing them. So before moving on, I did say I wanted to briefly talk about something in regards to my sister. Now, like I did therapy on Mike and Martin, I also did extensive therapy to help me cope with the passing of my younger sister. And to leave out details on personal stuff in her life and my family's life, I am just going to say that it was something that was very traumatizing for me. And so on the day that it happened, I did see her passing. I saw her after she passed, and that image stuck with me for a long time. And that day I was in a particular state of shock, and I had adrenaline from the experience itself that it didn't really dawn on me until later that evening when I was safe with my now fiance, then boyfriend. I spent the night with him. At the time I was still living in my grandmother's property back in Brooklyn, so I stayed with him that night in Jersey. And so I actually I stepped outside to call my friend, William's other student, and talking to him was the first time I cried. And the reason that I had stepped out in the first place was because my boyfriend, now fiance, was doing a ritual to help her pass because it was something that happened so unexpected, and that shock could lead to confusion of the soul. It's not like this was an elderly person who was battling a terminal illness for some months and knew it was coming and had a way to prepare themselves. No, this was a young teenager that passed away suddenly and unexpected. And so that state, and just being young also, it's hard to process things. You imagine being a teenager processing something heavy in your own life. Imagine your own death. It's something that your mind's not going to be able to wrap itself around, and that could lead to a spirit being stray and lost for some time until it actually comes to acceptance. So the ritual he did was to kind of bring her here into his temple space and then usher her on through into the light and let her accept what happened. Now, I was not in a state that I was prepared to deal with a ritual. I was not well enough emotionally at the moment, so I knew for my own well-being I had to step out while he did that. And so I decided to call my friend's William's other student, to leave his name out, his other student. So as I was on the phone, that was the first time talking to him about what had just happened, that I was finally able to open up and start crying, which was good because it led to the beginning stages of my own grieving process. But something really important happened to me after that. When my partner had finished doing the ritual for her, I came back up into the apartment, and he just said that he was done, and he shared his experience and that she was confused, and she was very resistant to moving on. But once she finally understood what happened, she understood that she was capable of moving on and that it's okay, and that she's in a state of peace, acceptance, and that was just something really powerful and important for her to have as she moved on to the next phase, so that she's not confused and lost and trying to stay behind and, you know, trying to argue her way out of it, as teenagers are wont to do for almost anything. And so at that moment, I saw a portal, a doorway of light open up in the apartment where the ritual was just done, and I got to interact with her, and I told her that I loved her. She said that she loved me, and then I saw something as she was ushered through the light. I'll leave out that experience because that's something personal to me that I don't want to share. But I will say that I saw Pan as she passed through the door, and she was standing in the doorway of light waving as it kind of closed and it sealed itself, and she was on the other side moving on to her next phase of life, whatever that looks like, and the continuation of her doing her will. Now, I immediately came out of that vision and I told my boyfriend, hey, this is what I just saw, and this is where in the apartment I just saw it. And he looked a little bit surprised, and he said, well, that was where I opened up the doorway for her to pass through. It was exactly in that spot. So to me, it lended credence that what he did actually worked. The fact that just any type of evidence for ritual shows that it's not just something that's happening in my own mind or in his own mind. The fact that he opened up a portal in a very specific place in the apartment, and that was where he had last saw her, and that was where I saw her. Now, I was not here when he did it. I don't know what he did specifically ritual-wise. I didn't know that he opened up a doorway. He just said that he helped her move on. I actually saw everything that he did after it was done, like the effects of it, and I saw the doorway close right where he had it a few minutes prior. And he said, you know, yeah, she probably just wanted to stick around to let you know that she's okay, and that's pretty cool, you know. The grieving was now set in motion by the phone call, and this began a healing process and a state of acceptance and just an understanding to knowing that she's okay. And it kind of broke the sorrow for me. It was a little bit of, wow, this person's good, and they're going to go on into the next incarnation, a little bit locked and loaded with some type of subtle, if not unconscious, understanding of what life is on a deeper level. They just experienced some type of enlightenment, and they got to see a pathway opened up for them, and just that realization that life goes on for them. Most people don't have that realization, and so they're just lost in this confused state, going through incarnation after incarnation. She had this awakening the moment in her death, and to see that was so powerful for me. So I just wanted to share that was something also that happened magically, and it's a gift. I was leaving out personal details about her life and what happened with her death and stuff like that, so that I'm respectful to her, I'm respectful to my family, but I'm also getting to share my experiences, my healing process, my magic, as well as give some type of tribute to her through this video. Now, I'm getting close to closing this video, and I want to talk about the idea of reincarnation and what that implies. Now, according to Crowley, a person who's doing the great work and is very serious about it is going to reincarnate approximately 6 months after their death. 6 being a solar number. I think that's why 6 months. So, a person who's not living a very spiritual occult life, that is not practicing the mysteries, it might take longer, you know. I do believe that on the astral plane, everything that's been imprinted, you can interact with that person's astral print long after they've reincarnated, you know, which is why this year I used his ashes, but I did not bring him through the veil. I believe that he's already reincarnated, so I didn't want to bring his astral form back, because I did hear a voice that sounded like him, but I sort of shut it out because I know that's not him. It's an astral impression, and you could get useful information out of that, but you could also become attached to it if you don't understand that that's not their ka, or their, you know, it's not them anymore. It's not even their ego. It's nothing. It's just an astral impression. It's like watching an old video, you know, and thinking that that's the person stuck in the TV, and it's not. It's just an impression of their consciousness recorded in the Akashic records. So, a person that's not spiritual, they could be many, many years, depending on what they need to work out karmically before they reincarnate again. If a person lived a very, very reprehensible life, they could probably be stuck there for a long time until a suitable body comes along that is willing to take on that negative karma, you know. Then there's other cases, like, I don't want to talk about a person in my life still sees their grandmother in their dreams who passed away decades ago, and it's like, I asked that person, do you believe it's them or just an astral impression? And how do you feel about reincarnation times? Has she not reincarnated after all this time? And it kind of helped me develop my idea that, no, people could reincarnate when they need to reincarnate. If you are specifically living, like, if you're a bodhisattva, for instance, if you've taken the bodhisattva vow, which means you're not going to go to nirvana until everybody else has gone to nirvana, you're one of the last people to cross that bridge, you are reincarnating constantly so that you're here to help enlighten other people and get them to that point. Now, until they're all at that point, then you usher them in, then you're allowed the reprieve. Or if you're practicing the great work in another way and you're taking initiations and you're really doing great work and you're very serious, then you're coming back as quickly as possible so that you could continue your great work, so you could prosecute the great work. Now, if you're not doing that, I believe that you could be stuck waiting for reincarnation for as long as you need to be until a body comes along. And so that person's answer was along those lines, that, hey, their grandmother was not specifically living a spiritual life. They were not inclined to reincarnation beliefs. They were not super serious about any religion. They were Catholic, but they were not dedicated everyday practitioner. They were, you know, a social practitioner, meaning like how most people might go to church every so often on a Sunday and might celebrate like Christmas and Easter and certain big holidays, but besides for that, it's just like a thing that's there, a religion. It's a tradition that's part of their life, but way on the outskirts. There's a lot more important stuff, and we'll get to that when we get to that. That's how their grandmother was. So yeah, it's very possible that she has not reincarnated. There's no pressing need for her to be here. She's not doing grade work and in a rush to get to the next grade and to liberate themselves. They're just taking things at their own pace, you know. So I do think that people can be stuck in the astral plane, so you can interact with certain people for longer than that 6-month period. But yeah, it's explicitly written by Crowley that after a 6-month period, a person doing the great work, or a bodhisattva, for instance, would reincarnate, and so you're coming back quicker. And for me, that's kind of like the idea of drinking the elixir of life. It's like, yeah, your physical body's going to die, but you're going to come back quicker, and you're going to have life over and over again, and you're going to find what you need to find to get you to remember, oh shit, I'm an occultist, and I'm supposed to be here doing this work. And I touched on, now in closing, I touched on it before, there's sorrow and joy when it comes to death, and it's like two states of being above the abyss. There's sorrow and joy. And I think death has that heavy, heavy sorrow. If you go to, like, Christian funerals, I've been to a lot of them in my neighborhood over the years, there's the idea like, oh man, this person's going to hell, I miss them, I'll never see them again, and it's just a very uneasy, tense, you don't know if you should laugh, cry, can we make jokes to try to make this less awkward, is that going to make it more awkward, everybody's tense and depressed, and now, I mean, like, death shouldn't be like that. Crowley writes death should be a celebration, so it's our greater feast. We should celebrate it. It's nothing more than a change, you know. We live in a universe where light is infinite. It's everywhere. It's only on our planet that it gets blocked for half the day, and until we realize, no, the sun's still lit out there. It's not dying every night or every season and then coming back to life in spring, you know, or in the morning. We came to realize, metaphorically, that life is just like that. Life is, it's infinite. Our spirit is infinite. It goes on, you know, and it's just the opaqueness of the planet, of our flesh, that blocks us from seeing spirit all the time. And so, knowing, when you get to the core of who and what you are, there's a certain joy. You get out of that sorrow, and it's a long, heavy path. There's many realizations to get to that point, and I've had glimpses of it in the past where I was sure, yes, I'm not going to be saddened by death. I could do this. When William died and I was happy, it reinforced that idea that, hey, I'm not going to miss anybody. I'm totally okay with death. And then I lost 3 people that were really close to me that were not magically inclined, and I got to see, like, shit, these people suffered, they were depressed, there was a lot of sadness around their death. The people in their lives all think that they're either going to heaven or hell and they're never going to see them again. And so there was a lot of these really heavy ideas that, in my view, were wrong. And if I may, I could recommend the practice Liber HHH. And what this practice did for me, there's a section, and you need to be prepared, because I've seen people do this and have a breakdown. They were not ready for it. And it's a many month-long practice that you do one day, give it a few days off, do it again, until the point that you're doing it every day, and you're able to progress line by line by line over the course of months. The gist of the program, the gist of the ritual is to first initiate it, then to witness yourself dying as many possible death scenarios as you can. So I watched myself get eaten by wolves, I watched myself fall off of a building, I saw myself die of gangrene, I saw myself get stabbed and raped, and like all types of crazy death scenarios, as many as I could think of, until I got to the point that I was desensitized to seeing myself dying, and knowing that I don't know what my death is going to look like, and then I came to a point with that ritual, I actually saw a glimpse of what I believe to be possibly my own death in the future and a time period of it. And I think I got some holy guardian angel stuff associated. I'm not going to talk about what it was, it's very personal to me, but I did get some glimpses of what I believed, some information about my own death, and it kind of gave me a sense of peace about the whole thing. And then there's sort of connection with the sun that comes along with it, and you identify yourself with the sun and going around and around and around. And there's something very symbolic about the sun and the spirit, reincarnation and death, that like the sun, we don't die after this incarnation, we go on. The spirit goes on. The spirit cannot die. The spirit cannot be hurt. It cannot be injured. It's going to go on, and it's going to reincarnate, and it's going to have a new life. And you're going to forget when you die what the last life was like until you do some past life regression work and you dig up some of those memories that are stored in your spirit, you visit the Akashic records, you extract that information, and then you start to see it and you identify yourself with the sun, and that you go on and on and on until such a point comes where your great work is finally complete, success, the final word of the magical diary, and you are able to go on and no more reincarnations, and you're finally at that state of peace and nirvana where you don't need to come back to any type of incarnation ever again, and things are peachy, you know? when you get to that point, there's joy. You're no longer afraid of death. You don't have to suffer. There's still pain involved in life, but the suffering becomes optional. Now, in terms of dying, and those who are familiar with the Egyptian Book of the Dead or coffin text, there is hieroglyphics of the Duat and what happens after death, and I think it's very simple how I could put it, and I don't personally believe that this is something that really happened. I think the Egyptians, some of them did believe this was an exact process, while others, probably real initiates, took this as allegory of what's going on. And so basically, a person at that time, it was believed, you die, your soul leaves the body, and it passes through the Duat, or the starry plane, the way of the sun, right? And I could talk about a whole bunch of metaphors of Apophis, trying to eat the sun, and Nuit, consuming the sun, and giving it rebirth every day, as the sun follows the heavens course, or the earth, rather, follows the heavenly course around the sun. They thought it was the other way around back at that time. But simply, the soul passes through the Duat, which is really just this astral plane, this starry sky, as the astral plane can be called. And as it's on the astral plane, it was believed that the person's heart was weighed against a feather of Ma'at. And if the person was living a very spiritual, healthy life, it would weigh the same as the feather or less than the feather, in which case they were permitted to go on. Those who were not, there's different theories of whether there was some type of hell or a storage place for corrupted souls, or whether those souls simply had another go-around through reincarnation. Now, the ones that passed on, they went to the Aaru, which is where Osiris ruled, and the Aaru, A-A-R-U, as it would be pronounced in English, and it's obviously a transliteration from hieroglyphics, and my pronunciation's probably off, but the Aaru is the weedy fields or the weedy plains. And now here's the interesting thing, right? When I talked earlier about nirvana, nirvana is a place of absolute contentment. There's no longer any want or need. You've been completely fulfilled, both physically, spiritually, mentally, etc. There's nothing else left on earth for your soul to experience, therefore it passes on into what they call the place of contentment through wheat. And that wheat and corn is very symbolic of nourishment and abundance, right? Plenty, in other words, which is a Greek god or demi-goddess, plenty, you could look into. It's also celebrated by Freemasons, and it's explained in one of the encyclopedias of Freemasonry, the idea of plenty. So the soul goes to this place that was symbolized by wheat, and really what that symbolizes is contentment. So I think this is not something that actually happens, but it's a great allegory. A person dies, their soul leaves the body, it goes to the astral plane. There's already a process that determines whether or not it is ready to move on, if it's being permitted through the abyss, so to speak, into the heavens, or not. And if not, it has to go back through probably the path of Tifereth and is reborn and recycled back down into Malkuth, in which case it's born again. Those who are permitted through the abyss know the pathway through the Duat into the Aaru, and they're able to reside in that place of contentment and absoluteness where there's no more want or need, and everything has been fulfilled by union with the divine. And you know, that's what Thelema's given me. I have these views, unlike before, where, you know, I was raised, you're going to hell, or you're going to heaven, or purgatory, and now I really understand, you know, I've had out-of-body experiences. I know that within this body is an energy and a consciousness that it's not even imprisoned here. I'm here because I choose to be here on a daily basis, and I have purposes in my life. I have goals, I have aspirations. I'm able to meet those goals, I'm able to meet those aspirations, I'm able to do my will on a daily basis. And there's something so beautiful and peaceful about that. That's what Thelema's given me. It's given me this perspective that, hey, I'm not living my life afraid of death. And this is one last thing I want to close with. The person who finally conquers the fear of death, you could say that they're a dangerous person, but they're a liberated person that's probably even more feared, you know, because what could you threaten me with? What could you threaten that person with? You know, and they're not afraid of death, you know? Yeah, pain and stuff like that, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I'm coming back here anyway because I choose to. You know, I have spiritual work that needs to be done on this plane. So even if I die, I'm just coming back here and I'm okay with that. And so when my time comes, you know, hopefully I could live up to what I'm saying right now, that I'm okay with it. And I think it's going to be a peaceful ride and a transition. And I look forward to coming back for another go-around, just like my teacher had said to me. And, you know, I feel at peace knowing that, you know. So that's just some stuff I wanted to talk about. If you have thoughts about any of these topics, whether it's ancestors, magical and mundane, death, hopefully this hasn't been triggering, hearing about my personal stories of death in my life and what's going on. I know everybody experiences people in their lives that they love passing away, and I'm sympathetic to it. That's why I said if you need to, get therapy. You know, there's help out there. Also, you know, thelemically, you could choose to commit suicide, and that's your choice. But unless you're 100% certain that that's what you need to do, there's help out there. And I, you know, personally, I don't recommend it because you're coming back here anyway if you do that, and you're gonna have to deal with what you dealt with. Like, you're not gonna get out of something that way. Karma doesn't work like that, and it's unfortunate for the people that do, that feel like this life is so unbearable I can't go on. It's like, we're all better off just dealing with what we need to deal with. Don't run from it because it's going to catch you no matter what. You don't get away with anything. You have to deal with it. So if you run and you know, you try to make that decision's permanent. You're not getting this body that you're in back again. You know, please get the help that you need. You don't have to tackle everything yourself. You know, you can't really trust everybody. You can't rely on everybody. But there are people who are there that mean well and that will help you if you ask them correctly. And you don't have to tackle everything alone, is what I'm trying to say. You can trust people to a great extent sometimes. You know, there are people who are willing to help you. There are people who could listen. Maybe that's all you need, is just somebody to listen or to help you in some type of capacity. Maybe share some type of experience that you need to hear something, you know. And whatever that is, I hope that you get it. You know, and I don't want to leave this on a sad note. I want to leave it on a happy note that, hey, you know, we all live our own lives. We make our own decisions. The ones that we love, they passed on. And I listened to a great Alan Watts tape that, you know, in a past life, our friends of today might have been our enemies, and in the next life, our enemies of today may become our friends. And you just don't know, and it's an interesting perspective to carry around, that, hey, let's just love each other. We're all on this journey together. Life is not easy. You know, there's struggles, there's trials. The society we're currently living in is still very unjust and savage, unfortunately. And it has this, you know, painting over it in high society that everything's great and peachy keen. But a lot of people are suffering. You know, there's a lot of pain out there. And so if you could help anybody, do it. You know, you're never gonna go wrong helping somebody. If you have the capacity to help, and if they request your help. Don't go helping people that don't want your help, you know. But if you could help somebody along your journey, or if you could live an example that people look up to, even better. Because then, you know, it's like that saying, you give a person a fish to eat for a day, you teach them how to fish they eat for a lifetime. If you're walking the spiritual path correctly, and you're able to be that hermit in the darkness that carries the light and that attracts people and they get to see that, you know, there's something really powerful about passing that light on, you know, passing that torch on to the next person so they don't have to walk in the darkness, and so that they could lead other people too, you know. So with that, love is the law, love under will. So peace.